He was just another face on the sidewalk, an elderly black man moving quietly through his day. But to a group of reckless kids, he became a target, a victim of their cruel laughter and ignorance. What they didn't know was that this man had spent 40 years shaping justice in America's highest courts. Their taunts weren't just cruel. They were a dangerous reminder of how quickly respect can vanish in the face of prejudice. And what happened next would change everything. His name was Harold Jefferson. To his neighbors, he was a quiet, dignified man who lived alone in a modest brick house at the edge of town. Most people who saw him walking didn't think twice. An elderly gentleman, cane in hand, taking slow but steady steps down familiar streets. Few knew his story, and even fewer understood the weight of the life he had lived. For more than 4 decades, Harold had served as a federal judge. He had presided over historic cases, stood firmly against discrimination, and carried the responsibility of fairness on his shoulders. Behind those calm eyes was a lifetime of battles fought in courtrooms where equality was not always welcomed, but demanded. In retirement, Harold sought only peace. He found joy in morning walks, reading old law journals, and tending to a small garden behind his home. The world around him had changed, but he carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had defined his years on the bench. Yet beneath that calm exterior lay scars invisible to the eye. Memories of being underestimated, dismissed, or targeted for the color of his skin. And though he had once commanded respect in court, he knew that out here, in the open streets, his robe and gavel meant nothing. It began like any other afternoon. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks as Harold made his way home from the corner store. In his bag were nothing more than a few essentials: bread, milk, and the Sunday paper. The quiet hum of cicadas filled the air, but so did something else. Whispers, laughter, the sound of sneakers scraping against pavement. Across the street, a group of teenagers had noticed him. Their voices were loud, careless, dripping with mockery. At first, Harold ignored them. He had walked these streets long enough to know that sometimes silence was the best response. But the kids didn't. Stop! One mimicked the slow rhythm of his cane, dragging his foot dramatically, while another shouted insults too sharp to be mistaken for jokes. "Hey, old man, you lost. Bet you can't even make it across the street without that stick." The words carried an undertone Harold knew all too well. This wasn't just about age. Their sneers, their eyes lingering too long on his skin. It was racism, dressed in the thin disguise of humor. He tightened his grip on the cane, his jaw firm, his heart steady. He had faced men far more dangerous than these boys. Lawyers who twisted the law, officials who sought to silence him, even threats that came in the dead of night during his years on the bench. And yet, standing here, unrobed and unrecognized, he felt the familiar sting of being reduced to nothing more than a target. The teenagers grew bolder. One tossed a crumpled soda can that clattered at Harold's feet. Another spat on the ground, just inches from where he walked. Their laughter rang out, cruel and echoing, as though they owned the street and his presence was an intrusion. Harold paused. Every instinct told him to keep walking, to reach the safety of his home. But something inside him resisted. He had spent a lifetime teaching that silence in the face of injustice only allowed it to grow. Still, he knew the danger. These weren't courtrooms, and these weren't arguments he could win with a gavel. A passerby glanced at the scene, then quickly looked away. Cars rolled by without slowing. In that moment, Harold was alone. An old man against the rising cruelty of youth, fueled by ignorance. The boys closed in, their laughter sharper now, circling him like predators testing their prey. His mind raced, not with fear, but with the weight of history. He thought of the generations before him who had walked roads far harsher than this one, who endured insults far deeper, simply for existing. Harold lifted his head, his eyes, tired yet unyielding, locked onto the boys. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. There was a stillness in his gaze, the kind forged through decades of demanding order in rooms filled with chaos. For the first time, the laughter faltered. Just a little. But what came next would turn a cruel game into something unforgettable. Something those kids would never be able to laugh about again. One of the boys finally stepped forward, smirking as he tried to snatch the cane from Harold's hand. The others erupted in laughter, egging him on, their voices sharp and reckless. For a moment, it seemed like nothing could stop them. To them, Harold was just another frail old man, someone powerless, someone to humiliate. But then, something shifted. With a calmness that caught them off guard, Harold straightened his posture. His voice, deep and commanding, broke through their noise like a gavel striking wood. Enough! The single word froze the air. The boy holding the cane hesitated, as if some unseen weight pressed against him. Harold's presence, quiet moments before, suddenly carried a gravity none of them could explain. "You think I don't know what this is?" he said, his eyes scanning each of them. "I've seen this before, in courtrooms, on streets, in lives destroyed because of hatred dressed as a joke." The laughter died. Confusion flickered across their faces. "Do you even know who I am?" Harold continued, his tone steady but sharp. "For 40 years, I sat on the federal bench. I ruled in cases that shaped this country. Men with power, men with influence, they all stood before me. And now, you believe I should fear you?" Silence fell. The group that once felt invincible now shifted uncomfortably, their bravado cracking under the weight of truth. The cane, still gripped by the boy's hand, slipped free as he stepped back, eyes wide. Harold didn't shout, didn't threaten. He didn't need to. His words carried decades of authority, of battles fought not with fists, but with justice. And in that charged silence, the kids realized the truth. The man they mocked wasn't powerless at all. He was a living reminder of the very justice they had taken for granted. The boys stood there, suddenly stripped of their arrogance. No one laughed now. Their faces, once lit with cruelty, were pale with the realization of what they had just done. They hadn't just mocked an old man. They had mocked a man who had spent his life defending justice, who had carried the burden of fairness in a nation still wrestling with its conscience. Harold didn't raise his voice again. He didn't have to. He adjusted his grip on the cane, lifted his groceries, and continued walking, leaving them in a silence more punishing than any lecture. Each step he took was a reminder that dignity could not be broken by ignorance, and that true strength was not in fists or insults, but in character. For the rest of their lives, those kids would remember that day, not because they had embarrassed him, but because he had exposed them. He had shown them the mirror of their own actions, and in that reflection, they saw not power, but shame. And for Harold, the moment was not new. It was just another chapter in the long story of resilience he had lived. But it was also a reminder of how quickly respect can vanish when prejudice takes root, and how fragile justice remains outside the walls of a courtroom. The question that lingers is not what Harold endured, but what we choose to do with stories like his. How many more elders must face ridicule? How many more lives must be diminished by hatred disguised as humor? The answer lies not in silence, but in the courage to confront it. Because dignity, once defended, can ripple far beyond a single street.